When we think about the beginning of life, the story we're usually told starts with a single dramatic event: birth. The moment a newborn emerges from the quiet warmth of the womb, the world celebrates the arrival of a new being, and we naturally associate the start of a person's existence with that first breath. But what if that is only one part of the story? What if the emergence we call birth is merely a transition, a crossing point along a far longer, more intricate journey that began long before the cries in a delivery room? From the perspective of biology, life does indeed have a starting point at conception, when a single cell forms from the union of sperm and egg. This cell contains a unique genetic code, a blueprint that shapes physical appearance, susceptibility to disease, and many predispositions toward behavior. Yet even here, the question of when you truly begin remains unsettled. Is it at the moment of conception, when your body first assembles from the fusion of two gametes? Or is it later, when patterns of consciousness and awareness begin to emerge in a growing brain? Some scientific studies suggest that consciousness, the raw capacity to perceive, to respond, to have experience, may have roots far earlier than we imagine. Neuroscientists have observed that fetal brains start forming complex networks capable of processing stimuli well before birth. By the third trimester, a fetus can respond to light and sound, show patterns of wakefulness and rest, and even demonstrate basic memory. These early experiences, although rudimentary, hint that life is already engaging with its environment, gathering impressions that may influence personality, fear responses, and even preferences after birth. In a sense, the world is being encountered in tiny, almost imperceptible ways, long before any traditional notion of life begins. But stepping beyond the biological lens, there is a philosophical and almost mystical layer to consider. Across cultures and centuries, thinkers have suggested that the self is not confined to the moment of physical emergence. Certain Eastern philosophies describe consciousness as a river that flows from life to life, sometimes pausing, sometimes continuing, but never truly beginning or ending. Other traditions speak of pre-birth awareness, where a soul, spirit, or consciousness exists in a state of preparation, observing potential lives, and even forming preferences that guide future choices. In these perspectives, birth is less the start of being and more the opening of a door through which a long history of self-awareness passes into the material world. Modern science can even approach these ideas in unexpected ways. Some researchers studying prenatal memory have found that newborns recognize sounds, voices, and even music they encountered while in the womb. Infants show preferences for languages, tones, and rhythms they were exposed to before birth, suggesting that what we might think of as preference or memory begins forming in a stage of life we rarely acknowledge. If memory and experience, components so integral to identity, can start before birth, then the story of a human being may not begin at the moment we take our first breath at all. It might have begun months earlier, quietly unfolding in the darkness of the womb. And yet even the womb may not mark the true earliest chapters. Consider that conception itself is not always a singular event of beginning. Eggs and sperm carry the histories of countless generations, with genetic information shaped by ancestral environments, exposures, and experiences. Epigenetic studies have shown that stress, nutrition, and other factors affecting parents can leave marks on genes, influencing everything from temperament to susceptibility to disease. In this way, the narrative of a human life stretches backward, a continuum where influences ripple through time, reaching across generations before a single cell forms in the mother's body. You are, in a sense, the culmination of a vast sequence of living experiences, a complex synthesis that existed long before any individual moment we might label as your start. Even beyond genetics and epigenetics, there is the matter of consciousness itself. Contemporary theories of mind suggest that awareness might not be confined strictly to the body. Some physicists and neuroscientists speculate that consciousness could be a fundamental feature of the universe, a pervasive quality that manifests in intricate ways in living systems. In this framework, the self, the you reading these words, is a localized expression of a larger, ongoing current of awareness. If so, birth is a kind of punctuation, a crossing point where a particular strand of consciousness becomes entangled with a physical form, but the strand itself may have existed in some form long before the body was assembled. It can be unsettling to think of yourself as not having begun at birth. It challenges the assumptions most of us carry about identity and time. But there is something liberating about it as well. If your life stretches backward into a continuum of influences, experiences, and perhaps even pre-birth awareness, then you are not merely a product of a single moment. You are part of a vast unfolding story, one that includes ancestors, environmental rhythms, and possibly consciousness itself before it became embodied. Your life, then, is not confined to the dramatic moment in the delivery room. That moment is only a hinge, swinging open onto a world that your essence has already begun to encounter, shape, and respond to. And if we pause to think about this, we notice that our personal narrative becomes richer, deeper, more complex. Every preference, every instinct, every fear or comfort might trace its lineage far back into states we cannot directly recall. Some of our choices, reactions, and even dreams may echo experiences from a time when we were not yet seen, touched, or named. This awareness can shift our perspective, showing that beginnings are not always sharp, discrete points. Sometimes they are gentle, layered transitions, where a life forms, accumulates, and emerges gradually, like a symphony swelling from the faintest hum to a full orchestral crescendo. As we consider all this, it becomes clear that what we call birth is both miraculous and ordinary. It is a threshold, a point where the invisible narrative of life intersects with the physical world. But the story it introduces has already been quietly in motion. You are not only what comes after birth, you are also the sum of what preceded it. The biological processes, the generational echoes, the potentialities explored by a consciousness before it fully enters the physical stage. To think of yourself in this way is to embrace a broader sense of existence, one that sees beginnings not as sharp points, but as unfolding, continuous, and interconnected experiences that stretch beyond what we can easily perceive. And so, as we start to unravel this idea further, we begin to notice the subtle traces of pre-birth life around us, the way early experiences shape instincts, the hints of memory in infancy, the ongoing resonance of ancestral echoes. Each moment of life, each breath taken, each choice made, carries with it a history that predates the moment of entry into the world. It is a reminder that life, consciousness, and identity are not confined to the visible timeline we often assume, but are part of a much larger, more intricate tapestry, stretching backward and forward in ways we are only beginning to comprehend. Even before we take that first breath, there is a quiet awakening occurring, one that is invisible to the outside world, yet profoundly significant. The developing fetus is not a passive vessel. It is an active participant in a subtle dialogue with its surroundings. From the earliest movements in the womb to the ability to perceive sound and light, life is already gathering information, shaping itself in ways that will echo long after birth. Research in developmental neuroscience has shown that by around the 7th week after conception, a fetus begins to exhibit tiny, spontaneous movements. At first, these motions are almost reflexive, mere twitches of muscle responding to chemical signals. But as weeks pass, these movements become more coordinated, more intentional, and more complex. By the 20th week, the fetus begins practicing breathing motions, grasping and turning its head. These are not merely mechanical exercises. They are the first rehearsals of interaction with the world, a world it has yet to fully meet. Sound enters the womb much earlier than we might expect. By the 24th week, the fetus can detect vibrations from the mother's voice, the rhythm of her heartbeat, the hum of daily life outside the womb. Studies have recorded fetal reactions to music and speech, showing changes in heart rate, movement patterns, and even facial expressions. These early encounters form a pre-birth memory, a kind of archive of experience that exists before any conscious memory is thought possible. It suggests that learning, recognition, and perhaps even preference begin long before life as we conventionally understand it. Consider the implications of this. A newborn crying at the sound of a familiar voice, calming to the rhythm of a song heard in utero, displaying preferences for tastes introduced before birth. All these moments hint at a continuity of experience that stretches back into the womb. We often assume personality begins after birth, that our likes, dislikes, and temperaments are shaped primarily by the outside world once we are born. Yet the evidence points to something more intricate. Life is already forming patterns, constructing the foundations of identity long before the first breath. Some of the most fascinating studies in this area involve language recognition. Infants just hours old show preference for the cadence, tone, and rhythm of the language spoken to them in utero. They can distinguish it from other languages they have never heard, responding with calmness or agitation depending on familiarity. These responses imply a form of memory and recognition that exists without conscious recollection. The fetus is learning, adapting, and storing information, preparing for life outside the womb in ways that are both profound and largely invisible. Even emotional responses can begin before birth. Research suggests that stress, relaxation, or excitement experienced by the mother can subtly influence the developing fetus. Hormones like cortisol can cross the placental barrier, shaping patterns of arousal, attention, and even future temperament. It is as if the fetus is not only learning about the external world, but also tuning itself to the emotional environment it will soon enter. The foundations of empathy, fear, comfort, and curiosity may be laid down in these quiet, unseen months, long before birth thrusts consciousness into the light. Beyond scientific observation, anecdotal evidence often points to awareness that precedes life in ways we cannot measure in a lab. Some children recall experiences from the womb, describing sensations of floating, listening to sounds, or even recognizing voices they encountered before birth. Though memory in its conventional form is usually considered impossible at such an early stage, these stories suggest that the boundary between pre-birth and post-birth consciousness may be far more permeable than we imagine. Experience does not wait for birth. It flows, gathering and layering, building the foundations of selfhood silently and persistently. Even subtle environmental influences can leave lasting marks. Nutrition, exposure to toxins, music, and emotional context all interact with genetic predispositions, forming a complex network of cause and effect. Epigenetics reveals that the womb is a dynamic environment where life is not just a passive product of genetics, but an active participant in shaping its own trajectory. Chemical signals, stress hormones, and sensory input guide the development of the brain and body, creating a blueprint that carries forward into infancy and beyond. In this sense, life is never simply a blank slate at birth. It is a manuscript already half written, waiting only for the final chapters to unfold. The question then becomes, how much of you already exists before your first breath? Are you a passive passenger carried along by biology, or are you actively forming the essence of your being through experiences no one outside can perceive? If a fetus can recognize voices, remember sounds, respond to rhythm, and absorb emotional signals from the environment, then the earliest stirrings of personality are already present. Laughter, curiosity, or caution may all have roots in this pre-birth stage, long before any external world can claim to have shaped them. Some philosophers have gone even further, suggesting that consciousness itself might not be confined to the physical body. If awareness exists in some fundamental form, then pre-birth life could represent a period where consciousness begins to interact with the physical world, a rehearsal space where identity and selfhood are rehearsed in preparation for embodied life. This view does not deny biology, but layers a different dimension over it, one where being is more than chemistry and motion, where awareness quietly witnesses, learns, and adapts. In practical terms, this insight transforms how we understand human development. Infancy is not the start of learning or personality formation. It is a continuation, a stepping out into the world with experiences already in hand. Pre-birth life is rich, adaptive, and meaningful. Every sound, vibration, and movement contributes to the scaffolding of the self. By the time a newborn opens its eyes for the first time, it has already been listening, feeling, and forming, in a way that most of us rarely appreciate. Even seemingly trivial details can take on significance. Preferences for certain tastes, responsiveness to familiar voices, and instinctual reactions to stimuli may all trace their origins back to these pre-birth experiences. The environment of the womb becomes a formative world, shaping perception, expectation, and the first hints of personality. And in this world, identity is fluid, emerging from countless subtle interactions rather than a single, sudden moment. So when we step back and consider life in this way, the narrative of human existence stretches far beyond what we see. It begins not at the dramatic moment of birth, but months before, in a quiet, complex interplay of biology, environment, and perhaps even consciousness itself. The evidence is subtle, scattered, and sometimes indirect, but the pattern is clear. Life is already in motion, learning, shaping, and preparing for the world it will soon encounter. And in these earliest stages, there is a profound mystery. The fetus experiences without choice, responds without full awareness, and yet accumulates the very essence of what will become individuality. This pre-birth development is a silent symphony, composed of movement, sound, and subtle chemical signals, creating rhythms and patterns that echo into the life to come. Understanding this phase challenges conventional ideas of beginnings, reminding us that what we call the start of life may only be the point where preparation meets perception, where the hidden labor of becoming manifests visibly in the world. The notion that life begins before birth is not just a modern scientific curiosity. It has been observed, speculated upon, and even revered in countless cultures across time. Ancient philosophies often portrayed life as a continuum, a flowing essence that did not start or stop at physical milestones. In some traditions, the soul is thought to linger in a state of preparation, selecting or sensing the circumstances of its forthcoming life. Even without invoking spirituality, the idea resonates with what modern science is beginning to uncover, that identity, memory, and experience can emerge long before the dramatic entrance we call birth. Consider stories told by children who recall experiences from before birth. In certain cases, these recollections are surprisingly detailed. Some children describe the sensation of floating, of being submerged in a warm, dark space, or of hearing specific songs or voices they later encounter in infancy. While conventional memory might dismiss these accounts as coincidence or imagination, the consistency across cultures, generations, and individuals is striking. It hints at a form of pre-birth awareness, a consciousness that experiences, reacts, and perhaps even learns without the external markers of time and place we typically associate with memory. Anthropologists have documented cultural traditions that emphasize life before birth as a meaningful phase. In some indigenous communities, for instance, the unborn child is believed to choose its family or prepare for its journey into the world. The child is not seen as an empty vessel, but as a participant in the ongoing story of existence, already aware and already influenced by a form of intentionality. These perspectives echo the observations of fetal responsiveness in modern science. The idea that life is not passive but engaged, that the earliest stages of selfhood are quietly forming in the womb. Western philosophy has grappled with similar questions. Plato, for example, suggested that the soul is immortal and carries knowledge from existence before birth, a pre-life awareness that shapes our instincts, intuitions, and perceptions in the material world. Later thinkers, including modern psychologists, have explored how memory and identity might not be as constrained by linear time as we imagine. In this framework, birth is a threshold, a point where consciousness encounters a new physical environment, but it is not the origin of consciousness itself. Our sense of self may already exist, partially formed, partially aware, waiting for a body through which to express it. Stories of pre-birth influence extend beyond memory into behavior. Infants often show innate preferences, whether for certain sounds, tastes, or even patterns of movement. Some children demonstrate remarkable familiarity with music or language before any exposure outside the womb. While these tendencies could be explained as instinct, they also suggest a continuity of experience, an early shaping of personality that occurs before birth. The patterns are subtle, yet their consistency across individuals points to a broader truth. Human life is not a sudden eruption into the world, but a gradual unfolding of identity. Cross-cultural examinations also reveal striking parallels. In many Eastern philosophies, life is seen as a cycle, with consciousness existing in states beyond the physical. The unborn child is sometimes described as already engaging with the rhythms of existence, learning from subtle signals and preparing for embodiment. Similarly, in certain indigenous traditions, prenatal development is not just physical but spiritual, with the child forming preferences, learning patterns, and even making decisions about timing and conditions. These accounts, while framed in symbolic language, align curiously well with the biological realities uncovered by modern science. Movement, response, and memory all occur long before birth. There is also a growing body of research on fetal personality traits. Psychologists and pediatricians have observed that even before birth, fetuses display tendencies that later manifest as temperament in infancy and childhood. Some are more active, responsive, or sensitive, while others are calmer or less reactive. These traits do not emerge fully formed at birth, but can be traced to subtle interactions within the womb. How the fetus responds to sound, movement, maternal stress, and even the rhythm of daily life. In other words, individuality, the core of what makes a person unique, begins before the world can even see it. The environment of the womb, then, is not merely a biological incubator, but a formative space. The fetus interacts with sound, movement, light, and emotion, and each interaction leaves a trace. Think of it as a rehearsal hall where the patterns of future life are being practiced, refined, and stored. Preferences are discovered, tendencies emerge, and a preliminary form of selfhood takes shape. This perspective challenges the simplistic view of birth as the beginning, suggesting instead that it is the moment when preparation meets perception, when latent identity crosses into observable life. Even the smallest details may have significance. Studies of fetal movement reveal that repeated gestures, thumb sucking, kicking, stretching, are more than reflex. They are forms of expression, early explorations of capability, and perhaps the first signs of personality. When a newborn reacts to a familiar voice or rhythm, when it shows preference or aversion, it may be echoing patterns established in the quiet months before birth. Life, in this sense, is a continuous dialogue between organism and environment, unfolding invisibly until it becomes visible in the world. And if we widen our lens further, the story stretches even beyond the immediate womb. Genetic and epigenetic influences, cultural context, and even ancestral experiences converge to form the earliest layers of who we are. The experiences of parents, grandparents, and even earlier generations can leave subtle imprints that shape predispositions, reactions, and tendencies. You are, in a very real sense, the product of a vast chain of life experiences that predate your conception, building a framework that birth merely unveils. By considering pre-birth awareness in combination with these inherited influences, we begin to see life as a layered process. Identity does not spring from a single point, but emerges through a complex interplay of biology, memory, environment, and perhaps even consciousness itself. Birth becomes a milestone, not the start, an opening scene in a drama that has been quietly, patiently rehearsing for months or even years. Even the act of choice, something we usually associate with conscious postnatal life, may have its foundations in this pre-birth stage. The fetus responds to stimuli, shows preference, and may even begin forming patterns that influence temperament, attention, and later behavior. These early decisions are subtle, almost imperceptible, yet they are the first whispers of individuality. Long before the world can shape the infant is already shaping itself, developing a personality that will continue to unfold across years, decades, and experiences yet to come. Stories, science, and philosophy all converge on a remarkable insight. Beginnings are not always abrupt, not always easily defined. Life, consciousness, and identity stretch backward, forming in quiet, unseen ways before the drama of birth makes them visible. Each movement in the womb, each reaction to sound or rhythm, each tiny kick or turn, is a note in the symphony of pre-birth existence, contributing to the complex melody of what will become a unique, individual life. And so, as we continue to explore this idea, it becomes clear that the narrative of who we are cannot be confined to a single moment. It begins long before the first cry, long before eyes open to the world, and perhaps even long before the physical body itself emerges. The story of selfhood is woven from threads of biology, memory, experience, and possibly awareness that transcends conventional definitions. Birth is an entry, a threshold, a revelation, but the life that emerges has already been quietly, profoundly, continuously forming. Even within the dark, fluid world of the womb, consciousness may be stirring in ways we barely understand. It's easy to assume that life before birth is purely instinctual, driven by biological necessity and reflex. But recent research and careful observation hint at something far more intricate, a form of awareness, a capacity to perceive, react, and even imagine, existing in an environment devoid of light yet rich in sensation. By the third trimester, the fetal brain has begun developing complex neural networks capable of processing a range of stimuli. Simple reflexes evolve into coordinated movements, the ears detect vibrations and voices, and the eyes, even if closed, respond to changes in light penetrating the uterine wall. Some scientists speculate that this period may allow for the earliest forms of experience, the first encounters with what might be described as the inner world of perception. In other words, life in the womb is not a passive waiting room. It is an active engagement with sensation, and perhaps, in some rudimentary sense, with thought itself. Researchers have noted that fetuses exhibit cycles of rest and activity strikingly similar to sleep and wakefulness after birth. During these cycles, rapid eye movement occurs, suggesting the presence of dreaming, or at least the neural mechanisms necessary for it. If dreaming or proto-dreaming occurs in the womb, then life before birth may already contain a private, inner narrative. The fetus may not be dreaming stories in the way an adult does, but it could be processing sensations, integrating memory, and experimenting with patterns of movement and attention. This inner life hidden from the outside world hints at consciousness as an ongoing process, not a post-birth phenomenon. Consider the tactile sensations experienced in utero. The fetus presses against the uterine wall, feels the warmth of amniotic fluid, and explores its own body. Movements are not random. Thumb sucking, hand-to-face contact, and stretching are early forms of interaction with the immediate environment. Each gesture carries feedback. Each motion becomes a lesson in cause and effect. In a way, the womb functions as the first laboratory of life, where the developing being experiments with its own capabilities, learning the boundaries and possibilities of its physical form. This is an unspoken, unseen education that shapes instinct, coordination, and even personality traits before birth. Sound plays a particularly fascinating role. The fetus hears the mother's voice, heartbeat, and the subtle vibrations of everyday life. Researchers have found that these auditory experiences influence behavior after birth. Infants show preference for melodies and rhythms they were exposed to prenatally, and can even distinguish linguistic patterns from birth. This implies not only memory, but selective attention, the ability to notice, respond to, and learn from certain stimuli. Consciousness, even in its most nascent form, appears to be active, shaping the way life will experience the world once fully embodied. Even emotional awareness may have its beginnings in the womb. Hormonal changes and maternal stress levels can affect fetal heart rate, movement patterns, and neural development. The fetus responds not only to physical stimuli, but also to emotional ones, absorbing the rhythm of the mother's state. Some researchers speculate that these experiences form the foundations of temperament, stress response, and sensitivity. In other words, emotional life may begin long before birth, quietly emerging through subtle interactions with the environment and the physiology of those around the developing child. Some accounts suggest that imagination, or at least a precursor to it, might begin in this stage as well. While the fetus cannot imagine in the adult sense, the brain's ability to integrate sensory input, anticipate movement, and respond to stimuli could constitute a primitive form of mental simulation. When the fetus practices movements, explores its environment, or reacts to sound, it is engaging in an early form of problem-solving and experiential rehearsal. The mind, even in this limited state, is beginning to model possibilities, to anticipate consequences, and to explore what it means to exist in a physical space. Cross-cultural observations often align with these scientific insights. Some indigenous and Eastern traditions suggest that the unborn child is already aware, already participating in the rhythms of existence, even if in a state invisible to the external world. The fetus is thought to recognize sound, anticipate patterns, and form a rudimentary sense of its own presence. In these views, life before birth is not simply a waiting period. It is an active, perceptive, and a meaningful stage of becoming, where identity begins to take shape quietly, invisibly, and profoundly. Even subtle patterns of fetal movement can reflect preference, personality, and potential. Some fetuses are calm and methodical, others restless and vigorous. These tendencies are not random. They interact with the environment, feedback from the mother, and the fetus's own emerging capacities. Early experiences in the womb may therefore influence the temperament observed in infancy, shaping attention, emotional regulation, and behavioral tendencies. Personality, it seems, has roots long before the first breath. The implications of this perspective are profound. If consciousness is active before birth, if perception, memory, and even a form of imagination are already present, then the story of human life must begin earlier than we have traditionally assumed. Birth is not the origin of identity, but a threshold, a visible point at which pre-existing patterns of experience and awareness enter the shared world. The life that emerges has been quietly forming, experimenting, and learning in an intimate, private universe that is invisible, yet fundamental to who we become. Even more subtly, the womb can be seen as the first canvas for awareness. Each sensory input, each movement, each subtle emotional cue interacts with the developing brain to create the earliest structures of selfhood. It is a space where potential is explored, reactions are tested, and patterns emerge, often before we could possibly perceive them. In this sense, consciousness is not a sudden event, but a continuous emergence, a slow unfolding of awareness that begins long before the dramatic moment of birth. This perspective transforms the way we understand beginnings. Life is not confined to a single point in time. Consciousness, memory, and identity stretch backward, quietly preparing for emergence. Birth, then, is not the beginning, but a continuation, a visible threshold where the invisible history of selfhood intersects with the tangible world. Every gesture, response, and reaction at birth carries echoes of a long period of silent awareness, a private rehearsal that has shaped the emerging individual in subtle but profound ways. And as we begin to recognize this, it becomes clear that the life we see is only a part of a much longer story. There are chapters written in darkness, in warmth and fluidity, in vibration and motion that precede any visible manifestation of being. The journey of selfhood is already underway before the first cry, before the first breath, before the world can even perceive its presence. To truly understand who we are, we must consider not only what emerges at birth, but the invisible, intricate, and profoundly formative period that came before it. When a newborn enters the world, the transition is abrupt in appearance, but seamless in substance. For the infant, birth is not a beginning, but a shift from one type of existence to another. The warmth, fluid, and muted soundscape of the womb are replaced by air, light, and a flood of sensory input, far more intense than anything experienced before. Yet the newborn carries within it the echoes of the pre-birth environment, the patterns, rhythms, and responses that have been forming for months. Every cry, every gesture, every reaction is in part a continuation of what was already developing before that first breath. The first hours and days of life are often described as a period of astonishment and adaptation. Newborns adjust to temperature changes, to gravity, to light and sound, and to the constant presence of other beings. But these adjustments are not entirely novel. They are extensions of prior experiences. The fetus has already learned to anticipate movement, respond to rhythm, and recognize familiar sounds. The newborn does not start from zero. It is a life already tuned to certain frequencies, prepared by months of silent rehearsal to meet the chaotic yet structured reality of the external world. Early studies in developmental psychology suggest that infants show remarkable consistency in preferences and behavior immediately after birth. Those who were exposed to certain rhythms, melodies, or voices in utero respond positively to them outside the womb. Feeding patterns, sleep rhythms, and even temperament in the first months are influenced by pre-birth experiences. In essence, the newborn is a bridge, a being whose initial identity has been shaped in private, now entering a world that continues to influence and shape it, but upon which it already leaves an imprint of its prior life. Consider the idea of sensory continuity. The rhythm of the mother's heartbeat, the tonal qualities of her voice, and even the ambient sounds absorbed in utero create a baseline for perception. Infants often gravitate toward familiar sounds, showing calmness when encountering them. These responses are early evidence of memory, learning, and recognition, revealing that consciousness is not a blank slate at birth, but a continuum. Life, awareness, and identity have already begun to operate before the external world acknowledges them. Beyond sensory recognition, emotional resonance is already present at birth. Newborns respond to facial expressions, vocal tones, and gentle touch. Their reactions are informed not only by instinct, but also by the rhythms and patterns absorbed before birth. The fetus has learned to respond to emotion in subtle ways, reacting to stress, calmness, or excitement in the mother. These early interactions shape temperament and detachment patterns, laying the foundation for the infant's developing social and emotional self. Life outside the womb is, in a sense, a continuation of this pre-birth social learning. Feeding is another area where pre-birth experiences exert influence. Infants show preferences for tastes and smells encountered during gestation, whether from maternal diet or environmental factors. Breastfeeding, for example, is often easier when the newborn is already familiar with the subtle flavors of the mother's milk. The pre-birth environment, with its chemical cues and rhythms, has already prepared the infant to navigate the new world, making survival not just a matter of instinct, but of learned anticipation. Movement and motor development continue the patterns established before birth. Kicking, stretching, and coordinated motions practiced in the womb become the building blocks for crawling, grasping, and walking. These early exercises are more than physical preparation. They are demonstrations of agency. The infant learns that movement produces results, that interaction with the environment has consequences. Consciousness, already present in rudimentary form, is now exploring, experimenting, and shaping behavior in a tangible space. Sleep patterns provide another fascinating window into the continuity of awareness. Even before birth, life cycles of rest and activity establish early circadian rhythms. Postnatally, these rhythms adjust to external cues such as light and feeding schedules, but they are rooted in pre-birth experiences. Sleep itself, especially the stages associated with dreaming, may continue patterns begun in utero, suggesting that the earliest forms of imagination, processing, and integration of experience persist beyond the moment of birth. Consciousness, it seems, is not interrupted but extended. This continuity also affects personality development. Infants differ in responsiveness, sensitivity, and adaptability, traits that have roots in pre-birth experiences. Some are calm, others alert. Some are easily soothed, others more reactive. These patterns are not imposed solely by postnatal environment, but emerge from the interactions, exposures, and experiences accumulated before birth. Birth, then, is less a starting point than a doorway through which these pre-existing tendencies step into the observable world. Even social awareness begins early. Infants track faces, imitate expressions, and respond to vocal cues. These abilities, foundational for attachment and communication, build upon the pre-birth sensitivity to sound, rhythm, and emotional tone. The newborn is already attuned to patterns, already forming expectations about interaction, and already equipped with a sense of self that will guide exploration, play, and learning. Identity, in this light, is a continuous process bridging the private world of the womb and the public world of postnatal life. The implications for how we understand human beginnings are profound. If life, consciousness, and identity begin before birth, then birth itself is a transition rather than an origin. The newborn is a living archive, carrying within it the memories, patterns, and sensitivities of pre-birth life. Every gesture, reaction, and preference is part of an ongoing narrative, a story that did not start in the delivery room, but stretches backward into months of silent preparation. The first months of life are a period of revelation, where the hidden life of the fetus becomes visible and interactive, confirming the continuity of selfhood. Even the challenges of early life, colic, feeding difficulties, and sleep disruption, can be viewed in this context. These behaviors may reflect not disorder, but adaptation, the continuation of patterns begun before birth, interacting with the novel stimuli of the external world. The infant is negotiating a transition, testing responses, and refining the identity that began forming months earlier. Awareness, memory, and personality are active participants in this process, bridging the unseen and the seen, the private and the public. The imprint of pre-birth life does not vanish once birth has occurred. In fact, its influence often ripples across years, subtly shaping who we become. Traits observed in infancy, the calm or alert temperament, sensitivity to sound or touch, responsiveness to rhythm and emotion, are echoes of experiences formed before entry into the world. These early patterns lay the groundwork for personality, memory, and even decision-making that persist well into adulthood. Understanding these origins allows us to see human life not as a series of discrete stages, but as a continuous flow, with each phase building upon the invisible foundations established before birth. Take memory, for instance. While conscious recollection of fetal life is exceedingly rare, subtle forms of memory can persist. Infants and even toddlers show recognition of sounds, rhythms, and scents experienced prenatally. This suggests that memory is not simply a function of postnatal experience, but an ongoing process that begins in the womb. Preferences, aversions, and patterns of attention often reflect these earliest encounters. A child who gravitates towards certain sounds or feels comforted by particular rhythms may be responding to echoes of pre-birth exposure, evidence that memory and identity begin forming long before we expect. Personality, too, bears the marks of pre-birth life. Researchers have observed that traits such as activity level, emotional reactivity, and social responsiveness often align with patterns first evident in the womb. A highly active fetus may grow into a child who is curious and exploratory. A more serene fetus may develop into a calm, reflective individual. These tendencies are not fixed, of course, and postnatal environment and experience shape them further. But the roots are visible long before the child is ever held in human arms. Identity is therefore layered, a combination of prenatal formation and postnatal adaptation, a bridge between pre-birth consciousness and lived experience. Even behaviors often considered learned entirely after birth may have prenatal origins. Feeding patterns, sleep cycles, and stress responses are frequently shaped by interactions with the maternal environment, including hormonal rhythms, emotional states, and sensory input during gestation. A child's sensitivity to stress, for example, may reflect the physiological cues absorbed before birth, establishing baseline responses that will interact with the external world. In this sense, much of what we consider innate personality may have deeper roots than previously recognized, emerging from experiences that occurred in the silent, enclosed world of the womb. These early patterns extend into social awareness as well. Children often demonstrate preferences for familiar voices, expressions, or rhythms, responding with calm or curiosity to stimuli reminiscent of prenatal life. Emotional intelligence, empathy, and the capacity to interpret social cues may all begin developing before birth, as the fetus tunes itself to the rhythms, tones, and emotional states of its immediate environment. Birth is simply the first opportunity to exercise these abilities in the wider world. The child enters life already equipped with a basic intuitive understanding of connection, attunement, and interaction. Some researchers propose that even imagination and creativity have prenatal echoes. The practice of movement, response to sound, and sensory exploration in the womb may constitute rudimentary exercises in prediction and problem solving. When a fetus experiments with movement, it is anticipating consequences, testing boundaries, and exploring its own capabilities. These activities, while primitive, lay the foundation for the imaginative and cognitive abilities expressed later in life. The early self is therefore not just reactive, but actively engaging with its world, forming the scaffolding for thought, creativity, and learning. As childhood unfolds, these pre-birth patterns continue to exert influence, often subtly. Personality traits established in utero interact with environment, culture, and experience to produce the unique individuals we recognize as children and adults. Sensitivity to music, emotional attunement, response to rhythm, and even decision-making may carry traces of prenatal life. In some cases, preferences and tendencies are so deeply embedded that they appear instinctual, as if life itself had already rehearsed the steps before the first conscious choice was made. Even adult behavior may carry echoes of pre-birth experiences. Consider decision-making under stress, response to rhythm or voice, or emotional resonance with others. These patterns may have been subtly influenced by early exposure to environmental and emotional stimuli in the womb. Epigenetics further reinforces this continuity. Prenatal experiences can leave chemical marks on genes, influencing physiological and behavioral tendencies throughout life. You're not only shaped by postnatal experience, you are, in part, an extension of the life that preceded your birth. Stories from adults who recall pre-birth sensations or dreams also offer intriguing insights. Some report vivid awareness of warmth, movement, or sound before birth, often interpreted as memory or intuition. While such accounts are anecdotal, their consistency suggests that pre-birth life may leave imprints more enduring than previously believed. These memories, however fragmented, hint at a continuity of consciousness bridging the unseen and the seen, the private world of gestation and the shared reality of life after birth. Even the most ordinary aspects of daily life may carry these echoes. Preferences for comfort, responses to familiar sounds or scents, and even subconscious reactions to stress may trace their lineage to pre-birth experiences. Birth is not an erasure of these patterns, but a point of emergence, where latent tendencies meet the external world. Consciousness continues to unfold seamlessly, revealing that identity is never born in isolation, but is always a continuum, formed in private and realized in public. The implications of this perspective are profound. By recognizing the continuity from pre-birth consciousness through infancy and into adulthood, we see that identity is not a fixed point, but a flowing process. Our habits, preferences, and reactions are often rooted in experiences invisible to the outside world, shaped in months of quiet, unseen life. We are not simply the product of the environment we encounter after birth. We are living archives of experiences accumulated before we entered the world. Even the concept of personal narrative changes under this light. Life is not a series of isolated stages, but a single, continuous process. The beginning is not a point in time, but a threshold of perception, a moment where pre-existing patterns meet the external world. From childhood to adulthood, behavior, memory, and personality bear the marks of this ongoing process. We are the sum of pre-birth awareness, early learning, and environmental interaction, a continuity of consciousness that transcends the traditional definition of birth. When we consider life before birth, we are not simply contemplating biology. We are confronting fundamental questions about identity, consciousness, and the nature of selfhood. What does it mean to exist if your awareness begins before your body enters the world? If memory, perception, and personality are forming months before your first breath, then the conventional markers of beginnings, birth certificates, birthdays, and the moment you are seen, become less defining than we have assumed. Life, consciousness, and selfhood stretch far beyond what we can easily observe, and this realization challenges our understanding of what it means to be. Philosophers have long grappled with similar questions. Some suggest that consciousness is not strictly bound to the physical body, but is a broader phenomenon that interacts with physical forms without being entirely confined by them. If awareness can exist before birth, then identity may not be an isolated point in time, but a flowing process. The self is not a sudden emergence, but an ongoing construction, built from experiences, responses, and memory, both pre-birth and post-birth. We are, in a sense, always in formation, our beginnings layered and continuous, rather than singular and fixed. Existentially, this perspective reframes choice and agency. Even before birth, the fetus exhibits preferences, responses, and tendencies. While these are guided by biology and environment, they hint at a nascent form of individuality, an early expression of will or inclination. From this point of view, life is not simply reactive, it is participatory. Consciousness engages with the world, even in the womb, in ways that shape development, personality, and the very essence of who we are. Birth is merely a moment of expanded interaction, where pre-existing tendencies meet the broader environment. The implications ripple outward into the questions we ask about responsibility, identity, and fate. If we begin before birth, then much of what we perceive as innate or predetermined may in fact be the continuation of earlier patterns of experience and awareness. Our choices, preferences, and inclinations carry traces of pre-birth life. Even when we act with apparent freedom, we are negotiating a framework constructed long before we were consciously aware of ourselves. Selfhood, therefore, is both emergent and preformed, shaped by layers of experience invisible to the naked eye. These ideas also intersect with cultural and spiritual perspectives. Many traditions view life as a continuum, where consciousness is not bound by a single lifetime. Pre-birth existence, then, is part of a broader narrative, one in which awareness is ongoing and identity evolves over extended spans of time. In this view, birth is not the beginning of life, but a chapter in a much longer story, a moment of entry into a world prepared by both biological and potentially metaphysical histories. Life is not linear, but cyclical and layered, a continuity of consciousness that stretches across phases of existence. From a psychological perspective, this challenges the way we think about development. If pre-birth experiences leave enduring imprints on personality, temperament, and responsiveness, then the traditional focus on postnatal life as the primary shaping period is incomplete. Identity is constructed through a combination of inherited tendencies, prenatal experiences, and environmental interaction. Each phase of development is a continuation of the last, revealing that beginnings are not confined to the visible world, but are woven into a broader tapestry of life. Even our understanding of trauma, attachment, and resilience can be influenced by this perspective. Prenatal stressors, environmental conditions, and maternal emotional states can leave subtle but lasting imprints on fetal development. These early influences interact with postnatal life, shaping emotional regulation, social responsiveness, and coping strategies. Consciousness, awareness, and identity are therefore not born in isolation. They are continuous processes deeply entwined with the earliest experiences of existence. Philosophically, this continuity raises profound questions about the nature of the self. If awareness exists before birth, what is the boundary of identity? Is the you we perceive as present in the world a new creation, or is it the ongoing manifestation of a consciousness that predates the body? Are we the product of a single life, or are we threads woven into a much larger, persistent awareness that stretches beyond measurable time? These questions challenge assumptions about beginnings, endings, and the linearity of experience, inviting us to consider life as a far more fluid, interconnected phenomenon than we typically recognize. Even in everyday life, acknowledging pre-birth influence changes perspective. We may begin to see habits, reactions, and preferences not as arbitrary, but as the result of a continuity of awareness. Our deepest fears, earliest joys, and most instinctive responses may all contain echoes of experiences formed before birth. Consciousness is then not a static point that emerges at birth, but a flowing, evolving phenomenon, carrying traces of unseen history into the visible world. This perspective also reframes how we think about connection and empathy. If life is continuous, then our awareness is not strictly isolated, but emerges in a relational context, shaped by the environment, maternal state, and even ancestral patterns. Identity is not only personal, but also deeply intertwined with others, formed in dialogue with a world already present before we enter it. The self becomes both emergent and relational, a nexus where pre-birth awareness intersects with the living environment. And so, the existential implication is both humbling and liberating. We are not simply a product of a single birth moment or even the first years of life. We are the culmination of a layered history of experience, consciousness, and responsiveness. Birth is a threshold, a transition, a revelation, but it is not the start. Life, identity, and awareness are continuous, stretching backward into pre-birth existence and forward into experiences yet to unfold. Our story is not confined to observable moments. It is an ongoing narrative that includes what is unseen, what is felt, and what has always been quietly forming. As we reach the final moments of this exploration, it becomes clear that the story of life is far broader than the moment of birth. We are often taught to think of beginnings as sharp points in time. The first breath, the first cry, the instant when a newborn is seen by the world. Yet the more we examine the science, philosophy, and lived experiences surrounding pre-birth life, the more evident it becomes that these points are thresholds, not origins. Life, consciousness, and identity are continuous, layered, and quietly forming long before the drama of birth announces itself. From the earliest cellular moments after conception, a cascade of biological and neurological events begins. Cells divide, the heart starts to beat, and the nervous system lays the foundation for perception and interaction. Weeks later, the fetus practices movement, responds to sound and vibration, and begins to accumulate the first traces of memory and preference. Even before birth, life is an active participant in its own development, responding to stimuli, adapting to the environment, and laying the groundwork for personality, emotional resonance, and cognitive patterns. Identity is forming in quiet, invisible ways, a narrative unfolding beneath the surface. The womb itself is more than a shelter. It is a world of sensory, emotional, and environmental input. Rhythms of the mother's heartbeat, the resonance of her voice, fluctuations of emotion, and the nutritional and chemical environment all leave lasting impressions. These subtle influences shape temperament, attention, emotional response, and even the early seeds of imagination. The fetus is learning, experimenting, and building the first scaffolds of selfhood, long before the external world can recognize its presence. Birth is not an initiation of this process. It is a transition, a doorway into a larger stage where pre-existing tendencies are expressed and refined. Scientific research confirms that pre-birth experiences echo into post-natal life. Infants show recognition of familiar voices and rhythms, preference for tastes and smells encountered in utero, and responses to emotional cues that align with maternal states before birth. Temperament, motor coordination, and even early problem solving appear influenced by these formative months. The patterns established before birth are not erased, but continue to guide behavior, shaping identity in infancy, childhood, and beyond. The story of selfhood is continuous, spanning both invisible beginnings and observable life. Even memory and imagination may be rooted in this early existence. Fetal movement and responsiveness can be seen as rehearsal for postnatal agency, a form of primitive anticipation and problem solving. These early exercises prepare the individual to interact with the world, to experiment with cause and effect, and to begin the lifelong process of learning and adaptation. Consciousness is not something switched on at birth. It is a thread that stretches backward into the hidden chapters of pre-birth experience and forward into the unfolding narrative of life. Philosophically, this perspective reshapes how we understand identity. We are not simply born, we emerge. The self is not a discrete, isolated point, but a flowing, continuous phenomenon, shaped by biological, environmental, and perhaps even metaphysical factors. Birth is a hinge between two states: a private, pre-birth existence rich in sensation, awareness, and formation, and the visible, interactive life that begins once we enter the world. Yet the invisible layers remain, influencing perception, behavior, and personality throughout life. This understanding also transforms how we think about relationships, connection, and empathy. The pre-birth individual is already attuned to rhythms, tones, and emotional patterns. Even after birth, responsiveness to others, the capacity for empathy, and social awareness may be guided by these earliest interactions. Life is not solitary, it is relational from the very beginning, shaped by context, environment, and connection long before the first human hand can hold it. Identity is simultaneously individual and relational, continuously emerging from a vast network of influence that predates observable existence. Even as adults, traces of pre-birth life persist. Preferences, habits, emotional patterns, and even instinctual reactions may echo experiences from before birth. Birth did not erase them, it revealed and extended them. Life is an unbroken continuum where each stage draws upon the foundations of the previous, carrying the past forward into new forms of awareness and interaction. Consciousness, in this light, is not linear but layered. accumulating experience even in stages invisible to the world. And so, reflecting on the entire arc of pre-birth and post-birth existence, we see that beginnings are not singular moments, but transitions in a continuum. Life emerges gradually, identity forms quietly, and consciousness flows uninterrupted from hidden beginnings into observable reality. Every gesture, every reaction, every preference is a continuation of a story that began long before birth and will continue to unfold in ways we can only begin to imagine. To consider life in this way is both humbling and expansive. It reminds us that identity is deeper and richer than what we perceive in the physical world. Birth is remarkable, yes, but it is only a doorway, not the origin. We are living bridges between what has been silently forming and what is yet to be revealed. Each of us carries the invisible echo of pre-birth experience into every interaction, every choice, and every moment of being. Life, consciousness, and selfhood are ongoing, layered, and profoundly interconnected, stretching backward into mystery and forward into endless possibility. The first breath is not the beginning, it is the continuation. The story of who we are does not start at the delivery room. It starts in the silent, unseen formation of life itself. Every movement, every sensation, every moment of awareness before and after birth is part of an unbroken narrative, a continuum that flows from the hidden world of gestation into the ever-unfolding present. To truly understand ourselves, we must see life not as punctuated by beginnings, but as a seamless, ongoing emergence where consciousness quietly forms, unfolds, and persists long before and long after the moments we commonly call the start.